Hey y'all, I'm Kim, host of Book Marketing Mania, and I'm so thrilled you're tuning in to learn how to build your audience and reach new readers on podcast. Today, we're continuing our series of podcast interviews with author and publisher spotlights on new friends that I have connected with through the PodMatch service that we talked about in episode 131. And this week, I'm talking to Michele DeFilippo, who works with self-published authors to provide high-quality book design, production, and publishing support. And we're going to talk about how and why Michele advocates for self-publishing and her own experience using the PodMatch service as a podcast guest. You're in for a treat today, so let's get to it. Hey, Michele, welcome to Book Marketing Mania. I'm so thrilled you're here to serve my listeners today.
Oh, thank you so much, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope I can share a little bit about what I know with your listeners.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I know you know a lot. And so y'all heard me talk a little bit in my introduction about how Michele and I connected through the PodMatch service, and we will definitely talk about that here in a little bit. But first off, Michele, as you know, we serve nonfiction authors and writers here on the podcast. And some of them are just now starting to write their first book, and maybe they're trying to figure out the different publishing routes they might take on, or some they've written a couple of books, some self-published, some traditionally published, but they're looking again to the next one, what publishing options are out there. And so I was so excited to connect with you and hear about 1106 Design, your company. So will you just kind of share a little bit about it and how you help authors make their publishing dreams a reality?
Sure. I've been in the publishing industry for 52 years now. I started 1106 Design in 2001. And what we do is independent publishing the way it was originally intended. And that is the author is the publisher of the book. And the author hires the necessary service people to edit, design, proofread, make an ebook, and all the services that authors need to produce their book. And we offer all of that in one location, so authors don't have to go online and try to find and qualify and work with individual freelancers. We make it easy for them by just having that all set up in one place with us managing the project for them and with them.
Oh, yeah.
And what the thing that makes us different, it's natural for an author to finish their manuscript and say, oh, now I need to find a publisher. But that is actually not true. Everyone can open up an account at kdp.com and ingramspark.com and stay in charge of their distribution without sharing any of their revenue with a publishing company. So that's our core message, and that's what we help authors do.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I haven't published a book, so I'm clueless in some ways, other than I know how traditional publishing is. And I talk to people that do self-publishing, like they're, authors themselves. And then there's this hybrid publishing, right? Where you can kind of partner with a publishing agency. So how, does the 1106 kind of work with the authors? Like if they are going to choose the self-publishing route, but then they have to figure out who's going to help me write the book if I need some coaching, who's going to help me edit it, who's going to design a cover if I don't have any design skills. Is it all those pieces that y'all come and partner with an author to do?
Well, we don't get involved too much in the writing of the book, although I can recommend writing coaches if an author needs that. Where we begin the process is when the manuscript is finished and it's ready for editing. And then what we do, we help authors, we walk them through all of the steps that follow, usually in this order: editing, cover design, interior layout, proofreading, ebook formatting, and then the setup of the distribution. And that's where we're different than any publisher, hybrid publisher, self-publishing company, whatever they call themselves. It's all the same thing. What they do is they publish the author's book in their name. And when a book is sold, they get the report. They get the money, and then they give some of it to the author. If authors work with us instead, we set up the distribution accounts in their name. So when a book is sold, they get the report, they get all of the money, and they know exactly what's going on with their book at every turn.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, there are some hybrid publishers who actually participate financially with the author in the book. For example, the author may be charged for the book production, but then the hybrid publisher contributes the marketing services. So that's a fair business model. They have a co-investment with the author, let's say. And so then they deserve a portion of the profits on the back end because they're risking something right along with the author. But a lot of the companies that are in the space right now charge the author for everything, and they still take money on the back end out of the author's pocket. So that, to me, is just not a legitimate business model. And that's why we exist, to do things strictly for the author. We are working for the author 100%. The author isn't working for us. And so we facilitate that. And that is what independent publishing was originally meant to be, before all these other kinds of companies came into that middle ground between traditional publishing and self-publishing. I know
that's so great.
That sounds a little complicated, I know.
Well, I think it does, but I hear you. And I think that's where we often, I know when I talk to people, when they're trying to decide what publishing route to take, or once they do kind of decide, then it's like, then what? What do I do first? What do I do next? And like you say, they've written that manuscript, if they have already written. And I know a lot of people, they do, like they get it all written and then they're like, now what? And then it might sit around for a while because they don't really know what the next step is, because it is so overwhelming. So I'm so glad to connect my listeners with people like you, Michele, just to help kind of simplify it. I hate to say that, but that is what happens, right? Just so that we don't think like this big, huge thing that we have to go find all these different people to plug in all these different pieces. There's one person, one firm that I can go to that handles all of these things. So I know you talked about a lot of things that y'all do. Susan wrote a book called Publish Like the Pros, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I know that one thing I saw, I think on your website, where you talked about making self-publishing not be yucky. And that made me think of some of the self-published books I've seen, that I see them and I'm like, oh, if they had just gotten a little bit of help, they could have made it a lot better. So I'd love to hear, though, from your perspective, what things do you see jump out at you when you see self-published books that you think, oh, that kind of looks yucky, and it, just a little bit of help could have gone a long ways?
Oh, yeah. Well, the narrative that has taken hold on the internet is that self-publishing means do everything yourself. The author should design their own cover. The author should lay out their own interior pages and so forth. And that it flies in the face of common sense, frankly, because if you have no experience, you have no training, how can you possibly put out a book that's up to professional standard? Yeah. But it's a very appealing message, and a lot of people think it's an okay thing to do. And the results, of course, are substandard. And that's a shame, because there might be authors out there who have a very good message, and it's not going to get taken seriously, because when you send authors to look for your title on Amazon, Amazon is not going to only show your book. They're going to show all the best-selling books that are similar at the same time. So if you take a step back for a second and look at it from the buyer's perspective, if they see a book cover that looks amateurish and the description isn't well written, they're not going to take a chance and read your book. They're going to go to the best-selling titles instead. They want assurance that when they spend their money, they're going to get their money's worth from that book. So, the do-it-yourself route is really completely wrong way to go. Sometimes we'll hear authors say that they can't afford to do it any other way, but there's nothing to stop people from saving up until they can get the professional help they need. There's no rush to produce the book. And you can do yourself a great deal of damage and not have your message heard if you rush to put out a homemade book, let's say. Now, if you're producing the book just for your own satisfaction or for your friends and family, then that approach is fine. But if you expect people to spend money and buy your book, then the bar is higher. You need to give them their money's worth. You need to offer them a book that's on a level with traditional publishing so that they get their money's worth. And it's the foundation of marketing, right? You're the marketing person. If you have a good book to market, when people see it, then they're going to buy it, and they're going to tell people that they loved it, and they're going to recommend it on their social media channels. And none of that will happen if you have a poor quality book.
Yeah, that's so true. Because I know I've come across so many that, because maybe you've been following the author on social media or listening to their podcast, like, their content is really rich. And there's some things in that book that you really want to get your hands on. But then you see the cover and it kind of stops you in your tracks because it just doesn't match up, to what you think. Or I think about like when I go to events and conferences and things, and they have book tables, and there's like multiple books across the table of different speakers at the conference, or, different sponsors of the conference. And the ones that that are kind of that. I like how you said the homemade, kind of thinking about that, like the homemade DIY, they really do they stand out in a bad way, right? Not a good way, and you flip the back and it looks different. I always think about like the huge print, which as we get older, I love huge print, but when I'm looking at a book as a whole, that's what I notice is like the back cover, like the font's really huge, or the inside pages, the font's really huge because it's like it's less, less copy, but it makes a bigger book, right? And so there's so many things like that I think if you have somebody like Susan in your court, you're not going to be making some of those things that you'll regret later. I hate to say mistakes, but it is things you're going to regret later and you're going to want to do it over. And if we slow down a little bit in the beginning and get some help, it might be so much better in the long run for sure. Well, let me ask you to talk about your book, Publish Like the Pros, because that was definitely new to me and I'd love for our listeners to hear more about it.
Okay, it's really a booklet. It's about 88 pages. It's called Publish Like the Pros, an insider's look at a misunderstood industry. And so what I do, I offer it for free on my website at 1106design.com. Anybody can put in their email address and download it for free. And what I do is I walk people through all of the steps of publishing when it's done the correct way. And I go into the bit that I just talked about as far as making more money when you stay in charge of the distribution yourself. And basically just give a summary of what authors should be doing when they intend to publish a book for sale. And like I said, if you're doing it for just a hobby, doesn't matter. But if you want people to buy your book, you really do need to do the responsible thing and offer them a well-made book. Because they know the difference. And the last thing you want is for people to buy your book, feel like they got ripped off, and jump on Amazon and put a bad review up.
Yeah.
Because you can never get rid of those bad reviews. So the money you thought you saved really comes back to hurt you in the end if you do that.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I didn't ask you this before, Susan, what kind of timeline do authors look at when they come to you? They've got their manuscript written and they come and start the process with you. What kind of timeline do they look at before it's actually listed for sale on Amazon?
Well, that depends entirely on the length of the book, right? And the services that are ordered. But a full package, starting with editing and ending with distribution setup, most books are finished in 3 to 4 months.
Oh, okay.
And the reason for that sounds like a lot of time, but the reason for that is because at every stage, we have collaboration with the author. They review the editing. Sometimes they go back and want to add some text. Sometimes they want to go back and just have another look at the editing. And the same is true with every stage of the process: the interior design, the cover design, the interior layout. Then the proofreader weighs in and the author needs to review the corrections that the proofreader found. There's a lot of back and forth and a lot of time to get it done. Now, we can, of course, compress that if there's really a deadline, but not by too much. In our experience, we've done thousands and thousands of books. That's about how long it typically takes.
Yeah. And like you say, it sounds like a long time when you first say it, but then when you realize compared to other options, it's not that long at all. Or when you really think through working through each of those steps, you're going to have to go through each of those steps no matter what, right? If you are doing that handmade DIY approach, you're going to have to be that person to go through each of those stages. Or if you outsource it to Michele or to different people running each of those roles, then that's going to take time too. So I can imagine it's such a benefit to partner with y'all, Michele. You're leading that whole project, right? And so you're kind of telling the author, here's what we need to do next. Here's a deadline. I think that would be so helpful, especially as the author is like trying to figure out their marketing plan and their book launch plan. They can have more time to spend on that because they've got you managing that process for them of getting that book published.
That's exactly right. And it's taken me 20 years to build a really good team. Most of the people who are with me have been with me for 10, 20 years. And so the process does go smoothly because authors are not having to stop and figure out, okay, where's my editor? Why haven't I heard from them?
Yes.
And getting excuses and so forth. So we do have that all flattened out for you so that you can just focus on getting the book done. And while we're working, what you just said, the author can start thinking about how am I going to promote this when it's done? And so it just works very well.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of the horror stories about that, like they're having to chase down the people that they've outsourced some of the work to, and that really does hold up your time frame. So you want to really think through that. Well, that's so good. And I want to ask you, Michele, about Podmatch, where we originally connected for this interview, because I love the Podmatch service. And just like we talked right before we hit record, it's so fun to connect with people that you never knew existed. Like I'm always being asked about how to self-publish, or is there hybrid publishing options? Like who do you go to? And so I'm so excited to have you to put on my resource list and be able to send people your way. And so I would just love to hear, other than us connecting, obviously, just how you've used the Podmatch service and what benefit that's been to you.
Well, I'm pretty new at it. And for a long time, I've thought about, I really should try to go out there and be a guest. I didn't know where to begin to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
someone told me about Podmatch, and I just immediately recognized the value of it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
so easy. And authors actually can do this too, because then they can find places to promote their book on Podmatch as well. And they feed you matches every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting 6 to 9 matches a day. And
Mm-hmm.
you can basically see if you think it's a good fit. And if it is, you reach out to the podcast host and start the conversation. And it's just awesome. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but since I've been on Podmatch, we're getting a whole lot more leads,
Mm-hmm.
a whole lot more website visits. And believe me,
Yeah.
I've tried everything else to try to
Uh-huh.
accomplish that before without success.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's an outstanding idea.
Yeah, I think that especially, somebody with the business that you have, I think that you just don't even realize that might be a benefit of Podmatch, is just because you do have your profile there and the keywords you're using in your profile, and your profile does show up in the right places as a possible match, and people are curious, like they're gonna. I mean, if it's a podcast host, they're gonna click over to learn more about you, to vet you as a guest, but also, there's tons of authors on there. I'm blown away. Or somebody that wants to be an author and they see that pop up, they're definitely going to want to check you out. So that's so fun to hear that you have seen that benefit that we don't always talk about with Podmatch. It's usually just, getting guest interviews, either a host or a guest. But it's so fun to see that fruit has been coming out of your experience. And again, I'm so glad that we got to connect through Podmatch. Well, this has been amazing, Michele. So I want everybody to be sure and hop over to your website and check out your booklet so that they can learn to publish like a pro. And then is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we go, or just tell us if there's any other way to connect with you online?
Well, I'm old fashioned, so the best way to get a hold of us is on our website.
Yeah.
We're on social channels, but I did that. We kind of get drowned out there by everything.
Yeah.
So if you go to our website, you can click on our contact form and tell us a little bit about yourself and your book. And when you're ready, you can book a consultation with us. And that's what makes us different too. We're not a book factory. We don't give everybody the same solutions.
Mm-hmm.
We don't put our money into advertising to come up top in the search engine. We put our money into hiring really great people and doing a great job for you. And we like to keep the service personal. I don't want to serve thousands of authors a month, because there's no way to do that well. We want to serve
Yeah.
a few authors every month and do a good job for them. And that's where we're
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love that so much, Michele. Well, thank you for your time today. I'm so appreciative. And, I know that my listeners are going to get a lot of value out of this conversation.
Well, thank you, Kim. I so appreciate it. And you can reach out to me anytime. My direct email address is md@1106design.com. And I love to talk to authors about anything and everything.
Oh, good. Well, I'll definitely put that in the show notes because I bet they'll reach out to you. Well,
Great.
thanks, Michele. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too, Kim.
Oh, y'all, I hope you enjoyed getting to know Michele and 1106 Design. Be sure to check them out to see if they are a fit for you. And I also hope you'll check out the Podmatch service if you're interested in being a guest on podcast yourself. And if you're still considering pitching your book idea to a traditional publisher, be sure to check out episode 77 with literary agent Barb Roos, as she shares how to prepare your book proposal for a publisher meeting. And stay tuned next week for another author spotlight on my new Podmatch friend, Stacy K, who will share tips for authors considering self-publishing and what's working well for her to market her devotional, and of course, how she's using the Podmatch service to be a guest on podcast. I can't wait for you to meet Stacy. Thanks for tuning in today. And as always, I'll be there for you to help you build your audience and reach new readers one podcast at a time. See you then.